And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much.
Something is happening inside the walls of Buckingham Palace right now, and it has been building for 30 years. Not in the open, not in a press conference or a royal statement or a carefully choreographed public appearance. It's happening the way the most significant shifts in the British monarchy always happen. Quietly, deliberately, and with a patience that is almost impossible to fully appreciate until you step back and look at the full picture. And when you look at the full picture, what you see is this: Princess Anne and Prince William. Two people who have never been publicly close, who operate in entirely different registers, who represent two very different generations of this family, have allegedly reached the same conclusion at the same time. And the woman caught in the middle of that conclusion is Camilla Parker Bowles, Queen Consort, wife of King Charles III, the woman who spent 30 years becoming untouchable. Sources close to the palace suggest she is no longer untouchable. Stay with us, because what we're about to walk you through is one of the most layered, most consequential stories to emerge from inside the British royal family in a generation. And it starts not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a leaked document or a tabloid explosion, but with a phone call. The phone call that started everything. About 3 weeks before this story began circulating in royal circles, a senior palace aide made a phone call. Sources describe it as deeply unusual, not because of who was on the receiving end, but because of who wasn't. It wasn't the press. It wasn't a government minister. It wasn't any of the standard channels you go through when you're managing a royal communication situation. It was a lawyer, on behalf of Princess Anne, about Camilla. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. Short, precise. And according to sources, it had the unmistakable quality of a conversation between someone who had already made a decision and simply needed to confirm the path was clear. Not exploratory, not preliminary. Confirmatory. That call, sources say, was the opening move in something considerably bigger than a property dispute or a personnel decision or a symbolic snub. It was, sources suggest, the beginning of a coordinated campaign, methodical, patient, and entirely deniable at every individual step, to reshape Camilla's position inside the institution she spent 20 years climbing to the top of. And the question you have to ask yourself before we go any further is this: why now? Why 2026? After 30 years of silence, after 3 decades of Princess Anne keeping every private conviction locked behind the most disciplined public exterior in the royal family, why has she allegedly chosen this moment to act? The answer has 2 parts, and you need both of them. William's new power. The first part of the answer is Prince William, and specifically, what Prince William has become over the past 18 months. He is no longer simply the heir. He is no longer the man waiting patiently in the wings while his father manages the institution. He is making real decisions with real consequences, and the clearest place to see that transformation is in the Duchy of Cornwall. £1.2 billion. That is the value of the Duchy of Cornwall, land, property, investments accumulated across nearly 700 years of royal estate management. Tenant farms, holiday cottages, the Isles of Scilly, Dartmoor land rights, commercial investments that generate approximately £30 million in income in a single year. All of it under William's direct control. No consultation required, no approval needed from Charles, no committee, no oversight body, no institutional process that could slow him down or redirect his intentions. The Duchy of Cornwall belongs to the Prince of Wales, and since Queen Elizabeth's death, William is the Prince of Wales. And sources suggest he has been using that control with a precision that people inside Camilla's circle are only now fully beginning to appreciate. The clearest public signal of how William intended to use it came in a decision that generated significant ripples inside the palace. Annabel Elliot, Camilla's younger sister, an interior designer who had worked across duchy properties under Charles for nearly 20 years, disappeared from the duchy payroll. No public dispute, no statement, no explanation offered to the press. Just a name that appeared in the financial records for nearly 2 decades and then simply stopped appearing. She earned anywhere between £19,000 and £82,000 annually, depending on the project. That income, and everything it represented in terms of proximity to the crown, was gone the moment William took control. Ask yourself what message that sends. Not just to Annabel Elliot, not just to Camilla, but to every single person inside and outside the institution who was watching to see what kind of Prince William intended to be. He didn't replace Annabel with a neutral hire. He brought in his own people, friends from his personal circle, godparents of his children, people loyal specifically and exclusively to him. And royal commentators who noticed what was happening described it as causing significant ripples inside the palace. That decision was a statement, and Princess Anne, sources say, watched it happen and approved completely. The alliance that allegedly changed everything. Because here is what sources suggest happened next. That decision, the Annabel Elliot removal, opened a conversation between Anne and William that had been waiting years to take place. Two people who had reached the same conclusion by entirely different paths at roughly the same moment in time. Done waiting, done allowing institutional loyalty to override private conviction, done watching the woman who spent decades contributing to Diana's suffering occupy symbolic and literal spaces that sources suggest both Anne and William believe belong to Diana's legacy. Anne is 75 years old. She has been a working member of this family for over half a century. She watched everything unfold in real time: the affairs, the separation, the panorama interview, the divorce, Diana's death. She processed her feelings about all of it the way she processes everything, privately, professionally, with a discipline that makes her one of the most respected senior royals in the institution's modern history. And yet, beneath that discipline, sources suggest there has always been a private conviction that has never gone away. A view of what Camilla did to Diana, and what the institution did to Diana, and whether the woman who was shaped by those choices deserves the position she now occupies. Sources say Anne has carried that conviction for 30 years and has finally decided to act on it. The two of them, Anne with her institutional authority and her decades of accumulated relationships and her access to something we're going to come back to, and William with his financial control and his emotional history and his determination, allegedly formed what sources describe as a two-front operation: history and money, the past and the future, being reshaped simultaneously by the two people in this family with the most personal reasons to reshape them: Diana and the archive. The second part of the answer is Diana and a room. August 31st, 2027 will be 30 years since Diana died in that Paris tunnel. 30 years since William, 15 years old, walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London in front of the entire world. He is now 43, a husband, a father of 3, and in nearly 30 years of public life, he has never once made a direct statement connecting his feelings about Camilla to his feelings about what his mother went through. He never had to. His actions have been making that statement consistently for years. But sources suggest something shifted in the past several months. That as the 30th anniversary approaches, something in both William and Anne has moved from grief to intention, from private conviction to deliberate action. And the action, sources suggest, is rooted in a place that makes certain people inside Buckingham Palace genuinely nervous. There is a room at Windsor Castle called the Royal Archives. No tourists, no documentary crews, no public access of any kind. What it contains is the unfiltered, unedited, privately recorded history of the British royal family: letters, diaries, internal correspondence, the written record of what was actually happening inside the institution during its most turbulent decades, including the years when the Wales marriage was publicly and catastrophically falling apart. Princess Anne's access to those materials is at a level very few people outside the immediate family possess, and sources suggest she has been reviewing them. Now think carefully about what that means. The broad strokes of that period are already public knowledge. The 1992 separation, the Camilla Gate tapes in 1993, Charles's television confession in 1994, Diana's panorama interview in 1995, the divorce in 1996, Diana's death in 1997. All of it documented, analyzed, and debated across 30 years of books, documentaries, and retrospectives. But what sources suggest is in those archives goes considerably beyond the broad strokes. It is the specificity, the private, contemporaneous, written record of who knew what, when they knew it, who facilitated what, and how. The internal institutional dimension of a situation that the public record only partially captures. How Diana's concerns were received and handled. How the institution managed the situation where one of its members was suffering in a very documented and very visible way. The complete picture of what was actually happening, not the sanitized version, not the managed narrative, but the unmediated historical truth of it. According to sources familiar with Anne's alleged archival review, the materials tell a story about institutional failure that goes considerably further than anything publicly available has ever documented. And sources say Anne believes that story deserves to be part of the complete historical record, not shaped or softened by the preferences of the people who would rather it stayed contained. Camilla is one of those people. A complete and accurate historical record of the Wales marriage is not a comfortable document for the current Queen Consort. It never was. The difference now is that the person allegedly asking questions about whether that record should remain contained is someone with the access, the authority, and the personal motivation to do something about it. Do you understand what that means? Because the implications go far beyond a reputational inconvenience. Sources suggest Anne's position is straightforward. The historical record of that period should be complete and unredacted, and the woman now sitting beside the king at every state occasion has no right to shape how the most painful chapter of Diana's life gets remembered. William's financial precision. Now let's talk about what William is doing simultaneously, because this is where the story gets even more layered. The Annabel Elliot removal was the opening move, significant enough on its own. But sources say what followed went considerably further, and it has been executed with a patience and thoroughness that speaks to long-term intent rather than temporary frustration. Access to crown events, proximity to official royal occasions, invitations that had previously been extended to members of Camilla's wider circle, quietly withdrawn, appearances where Parker Bowles family members had expected to be present, restructured without explanation. The same slow, deliberate, entirely deniable narrowing of access that characterized the Elliot situation applied more broadly across every connection between Camilla's family and the institution William controls. Nothing that generates a headline on its own. Everything that adds up to something unmistakable when you step back and look at the full picture. And then there is the Diana dimension of what William is doing financially, which sources describe as entirely intentional and deeply personal. William has been quietly redirecting certain duchy-connected philanthropic resources toward causes Diana originally championed. Mental health, homelessness, HIV awareness, the causes Diana made her own during her lifetime. The ones the establishment initially resisted her championing because they were considered too raw, too political, too emotionally exposed for a senior royal to engage with directly. Diana touched them anyway, and paid an institutional price for doing so. Now her son controls $1.2 billion in assets and $30 million in annual income, and sources say he is pointing a portion of that directly toward the places his mother pointed when the institution she belonged to was actively working to contain her. Think about the scale of what that represents. Think about what it says, not in any statement, not in any press release, but in the architecture of how money moves inside the institution William now controls. The ceremonial war. Her ceremonial position is being affected too. And this part of the story is worth paying particularly close attention to, because it is subtle in a way that makes it easy to miss unless you're specifically watching for it. When Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May 2023, wearing the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, Queen Elizabeth's personal favorite, the one that appeared on British banknotes for decades, it was a statement. A carefully chosen signal that Camilla had arrived, that her position was fully legitimate, that the rehabilitation was complete. For her supporters, it was a triumphant moment. For others inside the palace, sources suggest it was a clock starting, because that tiara will one day sit on Catherine's head as Queen Consort. And when that happens, the symbolic transfer will be so total and so unmistakable that everything Camilla's coronation moment represented will effectively be overwritten. Sources suggest Anne and William both understand that perfectly, and they are not waiting passively for the day to arrive. In royal life, symbols are not decoration. They are power. The specific objects, ceremonies, and patronages associated with the crown communicate something to the institution and to the public about who matters, who belongs, and whose legacy endures. Camilla has spent 2 decades accumulating those symbols: royal patronages, charitable associations, ceremonial roles that give her position substance and legitimacy beyond simply being Charles's wife. Sources suggest that accumulation is now being interrupted. When Queen Elizabeth died, she held hundreds of royal patronages. The redistribution of those patronages among working royals has been ongoing since 2022. Sources suggest Anne has been involved in certain patronage decisions in ways that have quietly shaped that redistribution. Specific high-profile patronages that were being positioned for Camilla allegedly redirected, not through any announced decision that could be publicly pointed to, but through a quiet reallocation that sources describe as reflecting priorities rather than logistics. And in 2025, Charles granted William and Catherine the authority to issue royal warrants, the ability to publicly endorse brands and institutions on behalf of the crown, a privilege monarchs have historically guarded carefully. Extending it to William and Kate was a public signal about where the crown's symbolic weight is being deliberately repositioned. Toward the next generation, toward William and Catherine, away from the current reign and everything associated with it, including Camilla. Sources also suggest that decisions currently being made about how the reign of Charles III is being documented, official photographs, historical displays, crown documentary projects, are reflecting William and Anne's priorities about how this period should be remembered. Who gets centered? Who becomes peripheral? Whose presence in the visual record is prominent and whose is quietly minimized? Royal history is shaped by what gets preserved and how. The visual record of a reign becomes the historical record, and the historical record becomes legacy. Camilla's legacy, sources suggest, is being shaped right now by people with very specific views about what it should contain, the personal unraveling. And then there is Camilla's personal situation, which tells its own story. Camilla sold Ray Mill House. No press release, no lifestyle magazine feature, no carefully managed announcement, just a property that appeared on the market and disappeared from her portfolio. The Wiltshire retreat she had owned since before she married Charles. The place she publicly described as her personal escape. The garden she once called the best therapy in the world. Gone. Sources suggest that sale tells you more about where Camilla's head is right now than anything she has said publicly in months. People do not sell their personal sanctuaries casually. They do not part with the one place that belongs entirely to them, that predates everything that came after, unless something has shifted fundamentally in how they see their own future. Right now, Camilla moves through multiple royal residences as a matter of course: Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, Sandringham, Balmoral, the full infrastructure of a reigning queen consort. That picture changes completely when Charles dies. Sandringham passes to William. Balmoral passes to William. Buckingham Palace becomes William and Catherine's primary official residence. The properties Camilla currently moves through as of right become properties she can only access at William's invitation. Sources suggest her likely inheritance consists of Clarence House, valued at approximately £72 million, and Highgrove, valued at around £39 million. Significant assets by any normal measure, completely inadequate as a substitute for the position she currently occupies. She would go from queen consort, with the full weight of the monarchy behind her, to a private citizen. Queen Dowager title, yes, but living in two houses at the discretion of a man who grew up watching what she did to his mother. Does Camilla understand that arithmetic? Sources suggest she understands it very clearly. The family dimension compounds everything. Annabel Elliot, gone from the duchy payroll. Tom Parker Bowles' access to royal spaces allegedly curtailed following the Balmoral situation. The Parker Bowles family's broader proximity to crown events quietly narrowing. Camilla spent 20 years building a network of access and association for her children and siblings inside the institution she married into. Sources suggest William is dismantling it piece by piece with a patience and thoroughness that speaks to genuine long-term intent. The Ferguson liability. And then there is the Sarah Ferguson situation, which has become a liability Camilla genuinely cannot manage her way out of. Ferguson's name appears in the Epstein files released by the United States Department of Justice. There is no evidence of criminal wrongdoing on her part. But the association is real and documented. And in the context of Andrew's arrest and the ongoing institutional fallout, sources suggest William has made his position completely clear to Camilla. Distance yourself from Ferguson publicly and permanently, or accept the consequences of the association. Camilla has not fully complied. She views ending a friendship that predates her entire royal life as both personally impossible and fundamentally unfair. William views her continued loyalty to Ferguson as evidence of exactly the kind of judgment failure that justifies his concerns about Camilla's fitness to represent the institution going forward. That standoff is unresolved, and sources suggest it is costing Camilla influence inside the palace. With every week, it continues. Think about the position that puts her in. She is caught between personal loyalty and institutional survival. She cannot abandon a friend of 40 years without betraying something fundamental about who she is. She cannot maintain that friendship without giving William ammunition he is apparently more than willing to use. There is no clean exit. There is no version of this situation where Camilla comes out without losing something significant. Charles, the man in the middle. And sitting in the middle of all of it is Charles. And his position in this situation is one of the more painful things to examine honestly. He made a phone call to Anne in February of this year that sources describe as one of the most difficult conversations between the two siblings in decades. Not angry, not accusatory, quiet and pained. The call of a man who understands exactly what his sister is doing and exactly why she is doing it, and finds himself completely unable to argue against it with any real conviction. The call lasted 40 minutes and ended with nothing resolved. That detail alone tells you a great deal about where Charles actually stands. He is 76 years old. He was diagnosed with cancer in February 2024. The specific type has never been publicly disclosed, but treatment continued throughout 2024 and into 2025. He has maintained his public duties across that period with genuine discipline, but discipline is not the same as strength. And keeping up appearances is not the same as having the capacity to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Sources suggest his energy for managing complex internal family dynamics has diminished significantly over the past 18 months. And protecting Camilla from what William and Anne are allegedly doing requires exactly the kind of sustained, conflict-absorbing engagement he is least equipped for right now. Protecting Camilla would mean telling William to restore access and privileges to people William deliberately removed. William would not comply, and Charles knows it. It would mean telling Anne to stop whatever she is allegedly doing with the archives. Anne would not comply, and Charles knows that too. It would mean positioning himself publicly against both his heir and his sister simultaneously, in defense of the woman that millions of people still associate with his first wife's suffering. The political and personal cost of that position is one Charles simply cannot afford, and sources suggest he is fully aware of that. But here is the dimension of Charles's position that sources describe as the most painful of all. He knows why William and Anne feel the way they feel, because he was there, and he was the cause of it. He is the man who conducted the affair that Diana described in terms of profound personal devastation. He is the reason that grief exists. How do you argue against your son's grief over his mother when you are the reason that grief exists in the first place? How do you tell your sister that protecting your wife's position matters more than honoring the memory of the sister-in-law who suffered directly because of your choices? Sources suggest Charles cannot make either of those arguments with genuine conviction, because he does not fully believe them himself. There is a comment Charles allegedly made to a senior aide during this period that sources describe as quietly revealing. He did not express anger at William. He did not express frustration with Anne. He allegedly expressed understanding. The understanding of a man who knows that the people moving against his wife are doing so for reasons he himself created, and who has no answer for that. What this is really about. So what does all of this actually add up to? Because there is a version of this story that looks like revenge. William and Anne systematically dismantling everything Camilla built as payback for what she did to Diana. A 30-year reckoning finally arriving with full force. And there is another version that looks like something more considered and more lasting than revenge. Sources suggest the second version is closer to the truth. Simple revenge would look like Camilla publicly humiliated, stripped of everything in one dramatic moment. That is not what sources describe William and Anne as building. What sources describe is more patient, more permanent, and ultimately more meaningful than any single dramatic confrontation could ever be. Think about what Diana actually stood for. Not the fairy tale image, not the wedding dress or the tiara, or the fairy tale that ended so badly. The real substance of what she did. She touched AIDS patients when the establishment was still treating the disease as something shameful. She walked through active minefields in Angola to make a political point about weapons killing civilians. She sat with homeless people and looked them in the eye and treated them as fully human in a way that senior royals simply were not supposed to do. She championed mental health when it was still considered a private weakness rather than a public health crisis. She insisted on emotional directness at a time when the institution she belonged to viewed emotional directness as a threat. She did all of this against the active resistance of an institution that found her popularity destabilizing and her humanity threatening. And she was right about all of it. The institution was wrong. William knows this, not from historical analysis, not from books or documentaries, but from his own lived personal experience. He watched his mother be right while the institution punished her for it. He watched that contradiction up close for 15 years until the night it killed her in a Paris tunnel. Now he runs the institution. Sources suggest William's modernization agenda is not simply good management practice. It is Diana expressed institutionally. The emotional intelligence she was told was inappropriate, being built into the architecture of the monarchy William is constructing. The public accountability she was told was dangerous, being embedded in how his household operates. The genuine human connection, she was told, was beneath the dignity of a senior royal, becoming the defining characteristic of how William and Catherine engage with the public. Anne's contribution runs exactly parallel. Decades of quiet, genuinely impactful work that represents a living argument against performative royalty. The exact argument Diana made and paid everything to make. Anne never stopped making it. She made it in her own register, in her own way, through her own extraordinary record of service. But the argument is the same: Camilla's darkest reality. And here is what sources suggest Camilla is slowly and painfully coming to understand. She won the battle. She got Charles. She got the title. She got the coronation and the tiara and the seat beside the king at every state occasion. She got everything she spent 30 years fighting for. Everything the public was told for 2 decades she could never have. But the war was never about Charles. It was never about a title or a crown or a coronation moment. The war was about Diana, and what Diana represented, and whether the institution Diana tried to change would eventually become something worthy of the price she paid. William and Anne are allegedly building that institution now. Not for revenge, for Diana. And Camilla has no counter-strategy for that. You cannot argue against a legacy. You cannot litigate grief. You cannot outmaneuver a son who watched his mother die and spent 28 years deciding quietly and deliberately what to do about it. You cannot appeal to institutional loyalty in a room where the people doing the most institutional work are the very people you're in conflict with. Every move she could make requires the cooperation of people who have allegedly decided to stop cooperating. Every defense she could mount requires public sympathy from an audience that still, 30 years later, associates her name with Diana's suffering. Every argument she could make in her own defense would have to be made in a context where the 2 most powerful people inside the institution she belongs to have already framed the narrative, not through press releases or public statements, but through the quiet, irreversible language of financial decisions and historical records and symbolic reallocations that add up, over time, to something unmistakable. Sources describe her private reaction to the cumulative weight of all these moves as the response of someone watching their own carefully constructed image being methodically and permanently taken apart. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 quiet ones, each individually deniable, collectively devastating. She sold her sanctuary, the one place that was entirely hers, and sources suggest that sale is the clearest signal yet of where Camilla's head actually is. The signal of someone who has looked at her own future honestly and found it considerably less secure than the image she projects at every official engagement suggests. A legacy being written in real time. Diana never got to see what this monarchy could become. She got a Paris tunnel, 2 boys without a mother, a flag over Buckingham Palace that took the public's fury to lower to half-mast. She got an institution that spent years trying to contain her, and then spent decades trying to reclaim the credit for everything she represented. But sources suggest something is happening inside that palace right now that she never lived to see. Her son, the 15-year-old who walked behind her coffin through the streets of London while the entire world watched, now controls £1.2 billion and uses it to fund the causes she championed when the establishment told her not to. Her sister-in-law, the most disciplined, most private, most institutionally loyal member of the family, has allegedly decided that the historical record of what happened to Diana should be complete and unredacted and should not be shaped by the people who benefited from Diana's suffering. 2 people, moving together, quietly and permanently, reshaping everything Camilla built into something Diana would have recognized as hers. Not revenge. Something better than revenge. Legacy. The kind that doesn't require a press release. The kind that doesn't need a dramatic confrontation or a public statement or a moment the cameras can capture. The kind that is written in financial records and archive decisions and patronage reallocations and philanthropic redirections that accumulate over years into something that cannot be undone. And that, more than any property dispute or payroll decision or symbolic tiara, is what sources describe as Camilla's darkest reality in decades. She is watching her own story be rewritten, not by an enemy she can confront, not by a rival she can outmaneuver, but by a son honoring his mother and a princess who never forgot what that mother went through, both of them working together, patiently, permanently, in the quiet spaces where the real history of this family has always been made. The battle is over. The war has moved to different ground entirely, and on that ground, sources suggest, Camilla has no army left to fight with. If you've been following the developments inside the palace and want to understand how this story continues to unfold, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what's coming next in this family may be the most significant shift in the British monarchy in a generation, and you will not want to miss a single moment of it.